The first day of September dawned bright over Maplewood Elementary. The school's brick walls, faded by decades of rain and sun, stood firm like a landmark in the community. Parents lined up in the parking lot, shepherding their children with backpacks that seemed bigger than the kids themselves. Inside, the scent of fresh waxed floors, mixed with chalk dust and the faint sweetness of new books. In room 204, James Carter stood at the front of his classroom, adjusting the tie his mother had given him when he graduated from college. He was in his late 20s, tall and slim, with eyes that carried both kindness and conviction. On the chalkboard, he had written in neat block letters, "Welcome to history class, where everyone has a voice." James had spent the entire summer preparing, not just the lesson plans, but the little details, the posters of civil rights leaders and inventors, the bookshelf stocked with stories from different cultures, the jar of pencils labeled, "Take one, give back when you can." He wanted his students to feel that this was a place for them, all of them. By 8 o'clock, the kids spilled in, noisy and excited, their sneakers squeaking against the floor. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," shouted one boy, grinning wide. James smiled. "Good morning, Jamal. Welcome back." Another student, a shy girl with glasses, whispered, "Do we really get to choose our own project topics?" "Absolutely," James said warmly. "History is about people's stories, and I want to hear yours too." The energy in the room grew. Even students who usually slouched in their chairs sat up, curious. James launched into his first lesson, starting with a question written on the board. Whose story gets told and whose story gets left out? Hands shot up. The kids debated, disagreed, and laughed. James guided them, not lecturing but listening, turning each response into a stepping stone to the bigger idea. History wasn't just about dates and wars. It was about people, fairness, and truth. Outside the classroom, a few parents peeked through the small window in the door. Most smiled, impressed at how engaged the students were. But one woman frowned, arms crossed tight across her chest. Karen Whitfield. Karen had a reputation in Maplewood. She was loud, insistent, always ready to bend the principal's ear. To her, rules were meant to be enforced when convenient and bent when they weren't. Her son Chase sat near the back, doodling in his notebook. Karen's eyes narrowed at the posters on the wall. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Cesar Chavez, Maya Angelou. She pursed her lips as James spoke about how ordinary people can make extraordinary change. Later in the hallway, she cornered another mother. "So this is the new history teacher? He seems, well, I don't know if he's the right fit for Maplewood. All that civil rights talk. It's a little political for kids, don't you think?" The mother raised an eyebrow. "He seems great to me. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about how fun his class was." Karen sniffed and adjusted her pearl necklace. We'll see." Back in room 204, James dismissed the students with a smile. "Remember, your first assignment isn't about reading a textbook. I want you to interview someone in your family about their story. Everyone has history worth remembering." The kids filed out, chattering excitedly. James exhaled, sinking briefly into his chair. The first day had gone well. He knew not everyone would approve of his teaching style, but he wasn't here for approval. He was here for the students, for their stories, their futures. Still, as he glanced at the door window and remembered the stern face of the parent who had been watching, a faint unease flickered inside him. He brushed it away, unaware that the woman's disapproval would soon grow into something much larger, something that would threaten not only his job, but his place in this community. For now, though, room 204 was alive with possibility, and James Carter, the new black teacher in Maplewood Elementary, was ready for whatever came next. By the second week of the semester, James Carter's classroom had become the talk of the fifth grade hallway, but for very different reasons, depending on who you asked. For the students, it was exciting. They weren't just memorizing timelines or regurgitating facts. James asked them questions no one had asked before. What would you fight for? How would you change your town if you could? He let them stage mock debates and act out moments in history. Even Chase Whitfield, usually more interested in drawing superheroes than paying attention, had started participating. But for Chase's mother, Karen, things looked different. She didn't see lively discussion. She saw chaos. She didn't hear students learning to think critically. She heard bias, and she wasn't shy about saying so. At pickup one afternoon, Karen lingered by the car line, scanning for an audience. She found Mrs. Donnelly, whose son was in James's class. Did you know, Karen began in a stage whisper, Mr. Carter had the kids talking about protests today? Actual protests, with signs and chanting. Is that really appropriate? Mrs. Donnelly frowned. My son said it was a role play about the Boston Tea Party. Karen gave a tight smile. Exactly. But you see the pattern, don't you? All this emphasis on activism. I just think it's a little political. Children should learn the basics, not be turned into little protesters. The word hung in the air. Protesters? To Karen, it was an accusation. To most, it was just another piece of history. The next day, she stopped by the office, binder in hand. Principal Edwards, she said firmly, several parents are concerned about Mr. Carter's teaching style. He's different. Too different. He doesn't follow the usual curriculum. The principal, a cautious man who hated conflict, nodded noncommittally. I'll look into it. That was all Karen needed. She left the office with her chin high, the seed of doubt planted. The whispers spread. At soccer practice, she told a group of mothers, apparently he's focusing on race a lot. My Chase came home asking about segregation. 5th grade is far too young for that kind of talk. At the grocery store, she casually remarked to another parent, Mr. Carter's lessons are unconventional. I just hope the school board is paying attention. Some parents rolled their eyes, but others paused. Doubt is a slippery thing. Once planted, it grows quickly. Meanwhile, James remained unaware of the storm building around him. He stayed late after school, helping Maya rehearse her class presentation. He called Jamal's grandmother to tell her how proud he was of the boy's progress. He brought in photocopies of handwritten letters from World War II veterans, real voices that textbooks often skipped. To him, it was simple, teaching the truth, inspiring curiosity, giving his students respect. But outside room 204, in whispered conversations and carefully worded emails, Karen was sharpening her plan. It was no longer enough to complain. Now, she wanted him out. It happened on a Thursday morning, the kind of day when the sun glared too brightly through the tall classroom windows, making the chalk dust glitter in the air. James Carter had just begun a lesson on the civil rights movement. The children leaned forward in their seats, listening as he described a photo of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, one filled with ordinary people who decided they would no longer accept separate but equal. History, James told them, writing the words slowly on the board, isn't just about famous leaders. It's about ordinary people standing up when something isn't fair. Several hands shot up. Like Rosa Parks? Asked one girl. Exactly, James said, smiling. She was just one woman, but her courage... The door burst open. Karen Whitfield strode in, her heels clacking sharply against the tile. She wore her usual pressed blouse and pearl earrings, her expression a mask of disapproval. The room froze. Excuse me, she said loudly, as if her voice needed to be heard down the hall. I need to see what's being taught here. James blinked, surprised, but kept his voice steady. Ms. Whitfield, this is instructional time. If you'd like to schedule a classroom visit, the office can... I don't need to schedule anything, Karen snapped, glaring at him. I'm a parent, and I will not stand by while you fill these children's heads with your political agenda. The students shifted uneasily in their seats. Chase, her own son, sank low, wishing he could disappear. James set down his chalk. His heart pounded, but his voice remained calm. We're studying the civil rights movement. It's part of the state curriculum. We're discussing how people worked for fairness. Karen's eyes flashed. Fairness? Don't twist this. You're pushing activism, making children question authority, bringing up topics they're too young to understand. This isn't history, it's indoctrination. A murmur ran through the class. Jamal raised his hand tentatively. But we're supposed to learn history, right? My grandma said she lived through this. Karen's gaze snapped to him, cold. That's not the point, young man. James stepped forward slightly, shielding his student with his presence. It is the point, he said firmly. These students have a right to learn the full story of their country, not just the easy parts. For a moment, the room held its breath. Karen clutched her binder tighter. I'll be speaking to the principal. This kind of teaching will not be tolerated. You may think you're clever, Mr. Carter, but I have influence in this school, and I intend to use it. She spun on her heel and marched out, leaving the classroom heavy with silence. James turned back to his students. Their eyes were wide, anxious. He drew a slow breath and steadied himself. History, he said softly, teaches us that speaking the truth often makes people uncomfortable. But that doesn't mean we stop telling it. The tension in the room eased. Slowly, hands lifted again, questions forming in young minds that had just witnessed something they didn't fully understand, but would never forget. And James knew. The battle had just begun. The confrontation in room 204 spread through Maplewood Elementary like wildfire. By that evening, half the parents at soccer practice, the grocery store, and the church parking lot had already heard Karen's version of events. According to her, Mr. Carter had been teaching radical politics, making children question their parents' values, and creating division in the classroom. The words were carefully chosen, heavy enough to stir worry, but vague enough to avoid challenge. At her kitchen table, Karen sat with her laptop open, typing furiously. Her petition was short, sharp, and dripping with authority. We, concerned parents of Maplewood Elementary, demand the immediate removal of Mr. James Carter for teaching inappropriate and divisive material in the classroom. Our children deserve education, not indoctrination. She printed copies and slid them into a sleek binder, ready to collect signatures. The next morning, she stationed herself by the school gate. Parents arriving with children barely had a chance to sip their coffee before Karen descended. "Good morning. Have you signed the petition yet?" she asked brightly, holding out her clipboard. "It's about that new teacher, Mr. Carter. He's been bringing up politics in the classroom, completely inappropriate." Some parents frowned. "Really? My son said he likes Mr. Carter. He's learning a lot." Karen's smile tightened. "Oh, I'm sure he thinks so. But children don't know when they're being manipulated. We do. And if we don't act now, this will only get worse." A few, caught off guard, signed quickly just to move on. Others avoided her entirely, muttering excuses, but little by little, the binder filled with names. Inside room 204, James remained focused on his students. He noticed the sidelong glances in the hall, the sudden silence when he entered the teacher's lounge, but he carried on. His lessons were as alive as ever. Debates about fairness, projects about family histories, discussions that made even the quiet kids raise their hands. One afternoon after school, Maya lingered. "Mr. Carter," she asked nervously, "my mom said some parents are saying bad stuff about you. Is it true?" James knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "People don't always agree about what should be taught, Maya. But I want you to know this. Telling the truth about history is never wrong. And you deserve to learn the whole truth." She nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "I think you're the best teacher I've ever had." James smiled, but as she left, the weight of her words pressed on him. He had faced doubt before, but now it felt organized, sharpened. By the end of the week, Karen marched into Principal Edwards' office with her binder. She dropped it onto his desk with a loud thud. 57 signatures, she declared. 57 parents who agree this man has no place in our school. We expect the board to act. The principal glanced at the binder, uneasy. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Karen, petitions are serious business. We have procedures." Karen leaned forward. "Procedures? While our children are being poisoned with politics?" "No, Mr. Edwards. Action. Now." The principal swallowed hard. He was a man who preferred calm seas, and Karen had just kicked up a storm. James Carter's future at Maplewood Elementary was hanging in the balance. Though outside the walls of that office, a quieter, stronger force was beginning to stir. Parents who remembered James staying after school to tutor their kids, who had seen his impact firsthand, who weren't ready to let one loud voice dictate the future of their children's education. A counter-story was brewing, and it was about to find its voice. For days, Maplewood Elementary felt divided. In the parking lot, whispers replaced greetings. At the grocery store, conversations trailed off when certain names were mentioned. Some parents carried the weight of Karen's binder like a badge. Others avoided her gaze, silently ashamed for not speaking up. But slowly the silence began to crack. It started with a single email. Mrs. Alvarez, whose daughter had struggled with reading for years, wrote to a small group of parents, "Mr. Carter is the first teacher who sat with Isabella after school until she could finish a chapter without crying. He didn't have to. He chose to. If that's not the kind of teacher we need, then I don't know who is. Her message spread quickly, forwarded and reshared until it reached dozens of inboxes. Soon, other parents added their own voices. My son hated history until Mr. Carter taught it. Now he comes home excited to tell me about the Constitution. Mr. Carter encouraged my shy daughter to speak in class. She never felt confident before. He stays late almost every night. My kid says he helps anyone who asks, no matter what. By the end of the week, a new document appeared online. Parents for Mr. Carter. It wasn't fancy, just a simple counterpetition written in plain words. We, the undersigned, stand with Mr. James Carter. He is an outstanding teacher who has inspired our children. We will not allow his voice to be silenced. Signatures poured in faster than Karen expected. Some parents signed openly, proudly. Others signed quietly, not wanting confrontation, but unwilling to stay silent. At the school, the change was noticeable. Students whispered about the drama, sensing the tension even if they didn't understand it fully. Some of them began drawing little notes for James, slipping them onto his desk. We believe in you, Mr. Carter. Don't leave. Best teacher ever. James found the notes one evening when the building was quiet, his classroom empty. He sat at his desk, turning the slips of paper over in his hands. His throat tightened. He had been carrying the burden alone, bracing for the blow of Karen's campaign. But here, written in shaky fifth-grade handwriting and signed with glitter pens, was the reminder he needed. He wasn't alone. Karen, however, was furious. She confronted Mrs. Alvarez in the parking lot. Why are you undermining this? Do you want your kids taught by someone who doesn't respect our values? Mrs. Alvarez stood tall. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. My values are honesty, compassion, and giving every child a chance. That's exactly what Mr. Carter does. Others began to echo her courage. At basketball practice, one father told a group, Karen's got her petition, but I've signed the one that matters. My kid loves that class, and I won't let anyone take that away. The tide was turning. The more Karen shouted, the more her certainty looked brittle, and the more parents spoke up, the stronger their voices became. One evening, James received a knock on his apartment door. When he opened it, a group of parents stood there, Mrs. Alvarez, Mr. Lee, and two others. They held a manila folder filled with signatures. Mr. Carter, Mr. Lee said, his voice steady, this is for you. Over 100 parents, we're with you. Whatever happens next, we won't let you stand alone. James looked down at the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he accepted it. For the first time since the whispers began, the heaviness in his chest eased. The battle wasn't over, but now it was no longer his alone to fight. The school board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, and by 6 o'clock the parking lot of Maplewood Elementary was overflowing. Parents squeezed into every available seat in the multi-purpose room, some clutching Karen's petition, others holding the counter-petition in their hands. Teachers hovered along the walls, students peeked through the doors, and the air buzzed with anticipation. At the front sat the 5 board members, gavel in hand, papers stacked neatly before them. Principal Edwards shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his tie too tight, his forehead damp. He hated conflict, and tonight promised plenty. The gavel came down. Bang! Now, this meeting of the Maplewood School Board is now in session, the chairwoman announced. The first order of business, community concerns regarding Mr. James Carter, 5th grade history teacher. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned as Karen Whitfield rose, clutching her sleek binder like a weapon. She walked briskly to the microphone, her pearls catching the light. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice sharp and confident, I stand here as a concerned parent. Mr. Carter has brought politics and division into our children's classrooms. He has emphasized race and protests instead of focusing on the basics, math facts, spelling words, history without an agenda. This is not appropriate. This is not Maplewood. She held up the binder with a flourish. 57 parents have signed this petition demanding his removal. We cannot afford to let our school be hijacked by ideology. Scattered applause rose from a small section of the room. Karen smiled tightly as if victory were already hers. Then, from the opposite side, a voice rang out. Excuse me, Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to speak. It was Mrs. Alvarez. She walked forward with trembling hands, but a steady gaze. In her arms she carried the counter-petition, its pages thick with signatures. "My daughter used to hate reading," she began, her voice quivering at first. She struggled, she cried. Mr. Carter stayed after school with her, day after day, until she finished her first book by herself. He didn't do it for money. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he cares. The room grew quiet. "Over 100 parents have signed this petition in support of him," Mrs. Alvarez continued, holding up the folder. "We will not let one person's complaints erase the good he has done for our children." The crowd erupted in applause, louder this time, rolling through the room like a wave. One by one, parents began to stand. Mr. Lee approached the microphone. "My son never liked history before. Now he comes home excited to talk about the Constitution and civil rights. He finally believes history matters. That's because of Mr. Carter." Another mother stepped up. "He taught my daughter to raise her hand, to believe her opinion counts. That's not politics. That's education." A father's voice rang out. "My son used to dread school. Now he says Mr. Carter's his favorite teacher. That's the truth." The applause grew thunderous. Even some teachers stepped forward, adding their voices. "He inspires us too. He brings life into the classroom." Karen stood frozen, her binder clutched uselessly to her chest. Each new testimony chipped away at her authority, leaving her isolated, her once commanding presence shrinking in the flood of gratitude surrounding James Carter's name. Finally, the chairwoman lifted her gavel. "We have heard both sides. It is the decision of this board," she paused, scanning the packed room, "that Mr. James Carter will remain a teacher at Maplewood Elementary. Furthermore, we commend his dedication to his students and community." The room erupted. Cheers, clapping, even tears. Students hugged their parents, parents hugged each other. At the back of the room, James sat quietly, his face calm but his eyes glistening. For the first time since Karen had walked into his classroom, he felt the heavy weight lift. On the other side of the room, Karen's cheeks burned crimson. She gathered her binder and stormed out, her heels echoing against the linoleum. No one followed. The morning after the school board meeting, Maplewood Elementary felt different. The September sun seemed warmer, the halls noisier with laughter, the air lighter, as though a storm had passed. When James Carter arrived at his classroom, students were already waiting. Jamal, Maya, and even Chase stood by the door, grinning. "Mr. Carter," Maya blurted, "we saw you on the news." "They said you get to stay," Jamal added, bouncing on his heels. Chase shuffled awkwardly. My mom was wrong. I think you're cool." His voice was barely above a whisper, but James caught it. Inside room 204, the chalkboard was covered with colorful notes the children had left overnight. "We love you, Mr. Carter. Best teacher ever. Thank you for staying." James stood for a moment, silent, his throat tightening. Then he turned to the class with a wide smile. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. "Back to work. History doesn't stop just because the news showed up." The children laughed, but their eyes shone. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, James stepped into the parking lot to find an unexpected sight. Dozens of parents gathered, holding homemade signs. "We stand with Mr. Carter. Our kids deserve teachers like him. Thank you." They applauded as he approached. Some shook his hand, others hugged him. Mrs. Alvarez pressed her daughter's hand into his. Mr. Lee clapped him on the back. "You didn't just teach our kids," one father said. "You reminded us what education is supposed to be." For the first time since he had joined Maplewood, James felt not like an outsider fighting to prove his worth, but like a man firmly rooted in the soil of his community. Even Principal Edwards, timid as ever, stepped forward. His voice faltered, but sincerity softened it. "Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. I should have defended you sooner. I'm glad the parents did what I should have." James nodded respectfully. "We all have lessons to learn, sir. That's why we're here." The principal flushed but smiled. As the crowd slowly dispersed, James walked back toward his classroom. He paused at the door, watching his students pack up their backpacks, their chatter filling the room. He felt a quiet pride settle over him. Karen's campaign had tried to strip him of his dignity, to cast him out, but instead, it had revealed the strength of his students, his parents, his allies. He had not only kept his job, he had earned something far greater: the trust, the loyalty, and the respect of an entire community. James Carter flicked off the lights and whispered to himself, "This is why I teach." And as the door closed behind him, the halls of Maplewood carried not whispers of doubt, but echoes of gratitude.